All right, welcome back, and thanks, Josh, for kicking us off here. This is the first time I've met Dave today, and I've heard a lot about you. Well, not a lot, but I always have heard of Josh's libertarian friend, and now, now I know who this is. Um, and yeah, it's really great to have you here, and thanks for coming out and talking about this stuff. So that was kind of the extent of what I understood, but after listening to your conversation with Josh, I didn't know you were a computer programmer. So that's super cool. And you started way back in the days of was it Pascal, you said? And
No,
C,
Visual Basic is
Visual
what I
Basic.
started with. It was a VIC 20.
Okay. I'm not a computer programmer,
Mm.
but I have one of my best friends programs a lot. So
Mhm.
jokes about different kinds of languages and
Yeah,
yeah. So are you still doing that? Are you still involved or?
yes. I do. I'm still programming. I think everybody should learn computer programming because I think the best thing about programming is that computers don't have emotions that cause them to behave differently. What they have is rather mechanical and logical structure, which causes them to do exactly what you say, even when it's obviously wrong. And so the obviously wrong things that computers do are always because the programmer told them to. So the programmer learns humility. And that's my favorite part of programming.
That's great. No, I've heard that a lot from different people where just the fact that they know how to program makes them think about things in a different way.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there's a level of certainty where it's never the program's fault. And I guess novices are just, oh, this stupid code.
Yeah.
Like, this is ridiculous. Like, who invented this stupid thing? It's like, no, it's actually your fault. And if you understood, I mean, I've heard there's different languages that are maybe more efficient and more intuitive to use and understand. So there are differences in the languages, but still,
Yeah.
however the language is set up, you have to figure out what you can do with it to make it do what you want.
Yeah.
Not in a coercive way, though.
That's right. Well, it's hard to coerce something that they don't respond to threats anyway.
Yeah, not yet. Let's see where that goes. Yeah.
Yeah, there's another element in that, and it's pretty rare. Uh, do you know what flipping a bit is?
I know flipping the bird, but not
Uh,
flipping a bit.
no, in a memory chip is a series of bits, ones and zeros,
Ah, okay. Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's possible for a particle from the sun
Mm-hmm.
gets through and it flips a bit in the memory chip, and then the number on the memory chip is wrong. And memory chip manufacturers generally add error correction so to reduce the frequency of that. But there have been a couple times when I suspected that happened,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a drag, but you just run it again. If the same thing happens again, then you know that's not right because
That's
yeah,
literally the universe like messing with your
yes,
flipped bit.
yeah,
I've actually heard too, like when NASA sends up these computers, they even
yeah,
have a huge problem with that. So
yeah,
they have to like do some low temperature. I don't know. They have some way to deal with all of these
yeah.
particles interfering with the chips.
Encased in lead.
Mm,
Yeah, because there's no atmosphere to absorb all the bit flippers.
yeah, messing up with the chips. Yeah, cool. So, let's see. So I'm into Bitcoin. I really
Okay.
think it's cool. The whole concept of crypto. Well, right now there's like a million crypto things and it can get pretty shady. Um, but the ones, Bitcoin, I always hear about. That's like the original, the OG coin. I like the idea of total transparency. So that's one thing I think is good just in general, outside of like trading and economics. So one thing, so I'm involved in like science and publishing. And there's a huge problem with transparency also in science.
Mhm.
So they're also having more, I think the internet has been really key in kind of promoting these ideas.
Mhm.
Um, so that's what I originally liked about Bitcoin is that there's no funny business, right? And you can just see it out there. And that's one thing that frustrated me with just like the capitalism and things is that there's so many like or free markets, you can get into these weird like stock kind of game playing services that
Mhm.
can generate some kind of money, but it's really, they're just messing with the system, manipulating it to, like, what was it, pump and dump.
Yep.
It's not providing any value, but they're able to make millions.
Yep.
So those kinds of things are, I don't know, frustrating to me. Do you have an opinion on any of this?
I do.
Yeah.
It comes from programming, sort of.
Mm.
Uh, I think the simple way to put it is from Eastern philosophy, where you recognize all of your own suffering as your own fault, and you look for faults within yourself to repair in order to avoid the same kind of suffering. So when you fall for a pump and dump scheme, or you get scammed, or somebody robs you, all of the bad things that happen to you are the universe messing with you and saying, hey, here's an opportunity for you to see something in yourself that you could change to make your life better, so this doesn't happen to you again. And the victim mentality just sends people in the opposite direction. And a lot of people know there's something wrong with that. But to pinpoint it down to, yeah, it's basically saying, sorry, universe, I know you're trying to help me, but I'm going to go the opposite direction and get worse. And that's the victim mentality. So don't be a victim. Learn from all of those scammers and all the pump and dumpers and all the situations where it seems dangerous. Yeah, it's fraught with danger. Take little risks, learn from them, then take bigger risks and learn from them. And eventually you'll be able to take huge risks because they're not really going to be risks. Or you're like, yeah, it's a huge risk. And guess what the downside is? This is what I learned. How valuable is that? Oh, well, it's just as valuable as the other side, which is the upside.
Yeah.
So you take big risks.
Right. Well, so there's a recent example of this, which I was like super enthusiastic about it when I heard it. This whole like GameStop Reddit community that went to do this thing. Okay, we're gonna learn from these guys. We're gonna play the same game and we're gonna make our money in our own way. And not to play the victim card, but there's so many intertwined connections and people who are controlling the system that they eventually or essentially shut them down unfairly, I would say. I don't know if you know this, are you familiar with the story where they had
Wall Street bets.
Wall Street bets and they had Robinhood on GameStop and there was some connection. I don't know the exact thing, but there was some huge, large financial conglomerate that had control over the Robinhood app that these people were using. And then they saw that this large mass of people were coordinating in a free voluntary way to to kind of call these guys out. And then the app they were using to do all this stuff, they just turned off the buy button and all you can do was sell. And then people started to panic and then their whole coordinated activity was thwarted.
Right.
So not to try to be negative, but when I see things like that, it's like there are some systemic things that are bigger than the individual, and you can only learn so much. And to change these large societal things takes a large coordinated movement.
Well, do you use Robinhood?
I don't.
Have you ever?
No.
Would you?
If I think I would if I knew more about trading.
Okay.
Like I don't like the idea of just jumping in and doing something without some more information.
And would you use it for a coordinated exploitation of what you believe is inappropriate short selling, which is what the Wall Street bets guys did with GameStop?
Right. Me personally, I just know. I mean, that would be too risky for me.
And now you know because they tried it and then this systemic problem. Yes.
Yeah, that could be. I think even before that happened, I just don't feel comfortable. To me, it was going into the stock market and buying things like that. It's almost like going to a casino.
Yeah.
Unless I know more and I can have a better return on investment.
The house always wins.
Same concept.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're getting into my psyche about how I think about things here a little bit.
I think maybe we were already both there. I invested in the stock market for a while, and I read the news stories, and I looked at the patterns, and I heard about buy the rumor and sell the news. And I realized that the publications, to a lesser extent, the expensive publications like the Wall Street Journal, but the publications that are cheap are basically being used as a tool to exploit all of the people who are interested in investing in the stock market. And you can't destroy them.
Right.
You have to give them a little bit. You give them maybe about the same rate that inflation takes away from them. So they're not losing, but they're not winning either. And also you can control them because you tell them to do stuff because, oh, it's a good idea. And if they don't do it, then inflation's going to get them. So they do it, and it's ugly, and I don't like it. So I got out of the stock market.
Yeah. I heard, so just something along those lines, someone just gave me a little tidbit is basically by the time you hear about it on the news when it comes to stock markets, you are not the one taking the opportunity. You're the one getting exploited.
Yep.
But I do think it's important to, yeah, once you understand the system, maybe you understand your own limitations, and maybe it's not worth going down that route.
There's if you're trying to get to the top of a mountain, you can go straight up, but you have to be strong enough and have the stamina. And if you don't, then you don't go straight, you start going sideways. And the more sideways you go, the easier it is and the longer it takes. But you can get up to the mountain top using any of that, whether you're strong or weak or slow, it all works. You just have to figure out how to do it. But when you have government and regulations and big financial interests and government private partnerships and all that stuff is changing the landscape in such a way that, yeah, you can start circling up to go up the mountain, but you're going to run into a roadblock. And then what are you going to do? Are you going to come all the way back down and try to go straight up, or what are you going to do? Oh, well, you're not allowed to walk unless there's the path or the paved road or whatever. You have to stay within well, now you can't get to the top of the mountain. And that's what I see, and partly why I'm voluntarist.
Yeah, you got to cut down some vines and branches and do some trailblazing. Yeah. Do you think everyone's cut out for that? I don't know. It takes like a certain kind of individual.
The only person who has to cut the vines is the guy at the front.
Right.
There's plenty of them, and a lot of them are in jail, unfortunately.
Yeah, it seems how it goes though, right? You get someone who is made an example, and then people become outraged.
Yeah.
It's a larger thing. Yeah, I guess in the way I look at things is I only invest myself into things I feel like I can make an improvement on or something.
Yeah.
And I will, I do follow the path. If there's a brick wall there, I'm not going to spend 2 years trying to break it down. I'm going to do what I do well to go. Maybe I can make a ladder and figure out a way over the wall rather than break it down. And I think everyone's trying to get to the top of the mountain, but they have different tools, different capacities. They can support a leader that's breaking down walls, or they can, there's so many different things.
There's a slight difference in the way you're using my analogy and the way I use it. You did mention cutting through the thickets because nature gives us obstacles. You also mentioned the brick wall. Nature does not grow brick walls. Somebody built the brick wall. And so the voluntarist says, don't build the brick wall. How are they building it? Well, they're getting money. They're being paid to build it. Where's the money coming from? I'm paying for it because they're threatening me. If I don't pay for it, they're going to come and arrest me and put me in jail. So I'm paying for the brick wall. And I'm supposed to say, hey, please don't build the brick wall. We don't really want that brick wall. And everybody else is supposed to agree. And a lot of people agree, but they still build the brick wall because it's not enough to, in my head, the problem is that the people building the brick wall are correct in ascertaining the awareness of everybody who doesn't want that brick wall to be there isn't strong enough that they all agree, we don't want that brick wall, you're building it there, we're gonna stop you. We don't want it.
Right.
And so we let them because it's like, oh, well, that's the system and blah, blah, blah. And I think about it being the system doesn't make a difference.
Yeah.
What makes a difference is, do you have influence over somebody who is participating in the building? I do. I'm paying for it. Well, I could say I'm not paying for it. You guys come arrest me, put me in jail. That's fine. From jail, I'll write about the wall. And that could happen.
Changes have been made in that way,
Yes.
for sure.
Yes.
The other kind of insidious thing too is the people building these brick walls, they're typically like a smaller elite, like in the government, let's say.
Yep.
Part of their justification is, oh, well, you know, these other people that were using their money, they don't understand how important this brick wall is.
Mhm.
And we're helping them despite their ignorance or
Yeah.
something,
Yeah.
which to me is very frustrating. And that kind of mentality, you know, we've seen it recently, and I think it's getting worse in terms of,
Mhm.
and especially in states like California.
Paternalistic.
Yeah, they're treating
Mhm.
people like children, and you know, and that's not cool. And what we've seen, which is fascinating, especially in this podcast era where we got these really like intellectual people from around the world discussing things, people are interested in it, and they're fat, and it's like, you know, if you present them with opportunities, they'll be more interested. um but anyway, so I agree with those kind of brick walls, but there's also other things like actual brick walls that we need to do serve a purpose, like to uphold like the infrastructure. So when it comes to like libertarianism, or actually I just learned about this voluntarian kind of thinking, I do think there needs to be some kind of basic um governmental structure that's going to tax people and, you know,
Threaten.
well, I mean, we need a fire department, we need police, we need law enforcement, we need roads. You can say you can privatize all that voluntary situation. I would be very skeptical of how effective that would be.
The distinction is whether or not you threaten people.
Okay.
You might feel like we do have to threaten people if we want to have a fire department.
Mhm.
I don't feel that way. In fact, there is nothing that we need about which I feel that way.
Mhm.
We don't need to threaten people. What we need to do is tolerate failure.
Mhm.
So imagine that there's this fantastic thing that we could build,
Mhm.
and we have a whole bunch of people who pooled together a whole bunch of money to build it. It's just not quite enough. We need like 2 or 3% more. So we're like, what do we do? A lot of people are like, oh, well, let's just go rob people. I'm being blunt. What they really say is, well, let's set up a tax system and a
Mhm.
justification. We'll have a vote and blah, 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 do all that stuff. We'll have a state. The
Mhm.
state can provide the extra few percent. Then we can have this really awesome thing.
Mhm.
And I look at that and I say, if we have a big group of people
Mhm.
and they've pooled together a big bunch of money to do this great thing and it's not enough, that means we can't do the great thing. It
Mhm.
sucks, but we have to accept that. We can accept that, or we can build a state and the
Mhm.
apparatus and the tax, and we get all the crap that comes along with it, which is war
Mhm.
and manipulation and prisons full of people that shouldn't be in prison. And there's a whole big mess of stuff that comes along with, oh, we need this, so we're going to use coercion.
Mhm.
It's a whole big mess of stuff.
Yeah.
And I don't think we need it. We need to figure
Yeah.
out how to do it without coercion.
So do you think any form of taxation is a type of coercion or threat in that sense?
I don't impose the idea of coercion onto the use of the word tax, but I can't think of anybody who uses the word tax in a way that doesn't involve coercion.
Right. Well, it basically taking your money into some pool that's being used by someone else for.
Oh yeah, people
So that's,
fund companies all the time. That's not a tax. Well, okay,
Yeah.
so maybe I am attaching coercion to a tax,
okay.
but can you come up with an example where like somebody's collecting funds to do a thing and they're going to be the one that does it and other people are going to be the ones that pay for it,
Mhm.
and there's no coercion and it's called a tax? I don't think that happens.
Right. Okay. I think the libertarian philosophy and ideas, the way I understand it, is voluntarism. It sounds fantastic. I'm just a little skeptical on practically, can it be deployed on scale and mass, and also compete with other kinds of organization, other companies that organize themselves in different ways. Like with someone with our country that has a more socialist or more organized kind of structure, will they outperform? And I think it just, you might not be able to optimize in this like fully. Maybe I just can't envision how that would work at scale. Just in this completely like libertarian voluntary contraction. There's another one with contracts.
Social contract.
Anarcho-capitalism,
I mean, yeah,
or
but
probably contractualism.
yeah, contractual.
Um, I understand that
Mhm.
problem. I can't answer it directly. I don't think anybody can. Nobody can answer how do we have a peaceful government either,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
So what do you want to throw away?
Yeah.
Peacefulness or this dream of getting all the big things that government gives us without using coercion?
Yeah. No, I understand, and I'm not trying to like do an I gotcha. I'm just trying to understand things and find the limitations of.
Okay.
Can I chime in?
Yeah.
So two things came to mind. One is the idea of like a club dues. I'm guessing you wouldn't consider that coercion because
No.
people are voluntarily
Yeah.
contributing to it. And the second thing is the American Revolution. One of the ideas was no taxation without representation.
Yep.
And the idea is that, well, if you have a representative, then you're giving this tacit consent to a tax.
Mhm.
How do you feel about that?
If you have a representative because you chose to have a representative, then you're giving your tacit consent. If you have a representative because you were born in a place where representatives are assigned to everybody born in that place, you didn't give any consent. You just got born into a situation. There's a idea in my head about being bullied.
Mhm.
When you're young, a lot of people get bullied when they're young. I would think the bullies themselves become bullies because they're bullied by somebody.
Mhm.
So bullying perpetuates itself. And I would like to see that stop. It's not going to stop, but it can stop much earlier than it generally stops. It generally stops because people graduate from whatever school they're in and they don't see the person who is bullying them anymore. Sometimes it stops because somebody has the courage to defy the bully in a way that puts the bully in a position where he just can't bully anymore. It might be psychologically impossible. He might be physically disabled from bullying. He might be removed from the situation. Whatever the reason is, it often, not often enough, but it happens because the victim of the bullying, who previously didn't see a way,
Mhm.
sees a way, and it happens to work. They People who are bullied, they try all kinds of stuff, and sometimes something they try works. And that is what I see as the path to eliminating the use of threats to get things we know that we want.
Mhm.
Just give them up until we can get them without using threats. How do you do that? Well, giving it up first is the important piece. You give that up, and then you're like, okay, we don't have this, that, and the other thing. There's a whole bunch of stuff we give up.
Mhm.
And then that's going to naturally open up opportunities to see, oh, this is how I can get that thing. I used to get it using threats. I don't need to. Here I can get it a different way. So just giving up the things you can't get without threats is a great first step.
Yeah. It's in that sense, I like analogies. I don't know if you've noticed, but in that sense, it's like you're borrowing against your future when you're getting what you want through a threat.
Yeah,
Is that a decent
yeah,
way
I
to
like
think
that.
about? Because you're setting up a system that's going to generate more bullies and more animosity, and people are just going to be and then you're not going to cooperate, and then this, like you said, leads to conflict and wars and things like that.
Yeah,
So having that primary philosophy of um, it's not just like being able to express your own voluntary wishes, but respecting those of others. And then, um, yeah, I like the concept.
cool.
I'm still hung up on the practicality. Like if it was my way to like set up some government. I mean, this is so rudimentary, and I don't have specifics, but I think I would like the government. I think it was like a minimalist type of government. You're like you need some foundational structure that can pay for roads and maintain the roads and the police force and all of these things that we just live our life in. It seems like it's just there, and we don't have to do anything for it. But when it starts, there's a line, and this is the problem, is I don't know where that line is. And I do think some kind of tax is reasonable, but then you get too far and they're doing some crazy stuff with this money, and then that's not reasonable.
There's a guy who was upset about the potholes in the roads
Mhm.
in his city. So he got a bunch of asphalt and he got a truck and he went around and he started fixing the potholes in his city. The city didn't like that.
Because they didn't use the right asphalt or whatever.
No, it's because it wasn't his job. It was their job, and they had contracts with asphalt repair companies, and those contracts were becoming ugly
hmm
because it was becoming too obvious that people who were interested in fixing the potholes would fix them without having to pay taxes. And then how is the city going to justify taking money from people? They didn't like that.
Mm.
So I think they stopped him. But it's a great example of something you can do. It's civil disobedience now because that story came out and everybody knows, oh no, you can't go fix something that the public works department is supposed to handle. You're not allowed to do that. So go do it anyway.
Mhm.
Because if you want to make the point that we don't need the threats, then you kind of have to spit in the face of the people who are using the threats, which is like the bully story. Just say no.
Yeah,
And as more and more people start doing it, like, do you have a savings account?
I do.
It seems like a non sequitur, but you have a savings account, so you have some money. Lots of people do.
Mhm.
And when you see a problem and you feel like, oh, the government's supposed to take care of that because I pay taxes. Well, if you're like me, then you're like, oh, well, the government's supposed to take care of that. And they do steal from me to pay for taking care of that, but I don't want them stealing from me. So I'm going to go talk to the people who might take care of it without them and see if we can
Yeah.
get it done. And then my case will be stronger when I say, no, I'm not paying my taxes because you use coercion.
Mhm.
And that's going to catch on.
Right. I think some of these regulations have become way too bureaucratic and rigid, but just to take your pothole analogy a little different, and in my personal view would be like, okay, if the pothole was on public streets, but the pothole was like right in front of my driveway, and I have to run over that pothole every single time I come home and leave, I'm gonna fix the damn
Yeah.
pothole and
Yeah.
middle finger to those guys. But if it's like on the intersection down there by Target,
Right.
I'm not gonna
Right.
do that.
Right.
So I don't know, was this guy just going around fixing stuff up? It's like, to me, that doesn't seem like my responsibility. It's, well, my taxes are doing something. I hope it is. And
Right.
an individual doesn't have enough time to monitor.
But you see the shift.
Yeah.
The shift is, what is your responsibility? Make your life better. the intersection has a pothole in it. You want a better life. You don't want to ruin your car.
Mhm.
You don't have to go fix it yourself. You could go post a notice in Target.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm doing a GoFundMe because we want to fix the pothole.
Mhm.
Target could do it. You could talk to the Target manager and say, hey, can we make an announcement every morning about the pothole?
Mhm.
They're gonna be like, yeah, great idea.
Mhm.
And then I don't know how's the city gonna respond to that. They'll be like, oh crap.
Right.
But what was your objection?
Well, no, I was saying that
It doesn't seem
it
feasible.
depends. It's like if it's directly affects me and it's like within my realm of
Right,
existence,
right.
and they're saying I can't fix the pothole right in front of my house, and I have to run over it until they figure it out.
Then you would
Screw
think,
that. No, I would just
right,
like no,
right,
that's absolutely absurd.
right.
But I'm not gonna go down, like I said, to Kellogg's Road and fill up some.
This is the insidious nature of the tax.
Hmm.
Because you pay the taxes, they're supposed to take care of it and they're not.
Mhm.
And you're like, well, whatever. Eventually they will. It's not my problem. I don't need to worry about it. But if you weren't paying any taxes and you're like, oh, what's that thing out there? It's not good for me. It's not good for my car, but
Mhm.
you know, it's out there. I'm not really worried about it. How much more of a schmuck do you feel like now? Because you have no excuse
Mhm.
not to go and say, hey guys, let's fix this.
Okay.
Because you're being
Yeah.
forced to pay the taxes. It's insidious the way they take responsibility away from
Mhm.
everybody and say, oh no, you don't have any responsibilities. Just give us money.
Right.
It's sick.
Yeah. At the same time, though, like if we go back to like early civilization was getting started, just as again another analogy, is everyone was like a hunter-gatherer, right? But then when people started to centralize, then they started to specialize in different kinds of things, and everyone had to look out for all of the needs for the the housing, the food, the everything. But once you centralize, you go, okay, now I'm an expert. I know how to build shelters.
Yeah.
And then this guy is an expert. He knows how to go hunt.
Mhm.
And then you can start doing these kinds of things. So I think the idea of these central government that takes care of the road is in my everyday life, I don't have to think about how are we going to pay for this thing and organizing the money. And that's a lot of effort.
Yeah.
And I do think it frees people up to focus on things that are more interesting to them and they can
Yeah.
specialize.
Yeah.
And so this is where I'm torn. It's like I totally understand like
well, okay. The thing is, you have to reimagine the world where there's no threats. And in that world, this scenario that you're talking about, it still happens. There's going to be people who are like, I'm looking for group projects because I'm a group project manager.
Mhm.
Are you interested? And you'd be like, oh yeah, I could think of a whole bunch of things I want a bunch of people to help get done because they're not getting done and it sucks.
Mhm.
You're going to have a relationship with whoever that is, and it's going to become something like a government and collect taxes, but they're not going to use coercion. That's not acceptable.
Mhm.
You can't just go, oh yeah, I'm a group project manager, so you have to give me money. People are going to laugh at you.
Right.
And so in that imaginary world, unfortunately, it's imaginary,
Mhm.
where there's like threats aren't tolerated. You threaten somebody, they're going to be like, huh, you're threatening me. What's wrong with you?
Right.
It's going to be kind of a joke. Then people are going to figure out how to solve problems without the threats. And you can't have government at that point. You have to figure out, find the group project manager, find the people who are good at that specific thing, and then
Yeah.
get them together. And everybody's mode of living changes from, God, like when I was little, I thought, here's a great business idea.
Mhm.
And I talked to people about it, and like 80% of them were like, oh, well, did you check the laws? I'm like, huh?
Mhm.
Like, what does that matter? It doesn't make any
Are
difference.
you allowed to? It's like,
Yeah, are you allowed to? Yeah. And then I grew up and I'm like, okay, I see how important it is to always ask, are you allowed to? Like, erase that from your life and
Right.
say, we shouldn't be asking that question. We shouldn't ever need to ask that question, because you have a brain and you have a conscience and you know how other people work and how everything works well enough to decide, can I do this thing? Can I go out and stand in the middle of the road with a sign that says, there's a pothole here. If you want to throw me a $5 bill, I'll eventually get it fixed.
Mhm.
Yeah, you can do that. It's illegal to stand in the street. So, oh, it's not allowed, but it's like that kind of stuff disappears. And
Yeah.
then you become a renegade and a rebel and a civil disobedient and a hero.
Mhm.
And so I like to inspire people to become that hero.
That's great. And I think you made a good point too of, myself included, like everyone, when you are living in this kind of environment and the structure, that's all you know, and that's all you have. There's no reference point.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't even know what this kind of voluntary libertarian kind of society would look like. Are so I'm not well versed in this stuff, but are there countries or communities that have actually successfully kind of pulled this off? Or is there some environment like an experiment? You know what I'm saying?
Yes, your brother's house,
Okay.
right? I don't, no cops,
Oh,
no
that's
coercion, no threats. I've been here a couple hours, no threats.
A lovely sauce of love.
Grocery store,
Mhm.
there's a little bit of a threat. Nobody's gonna go in and say, oh, that looks really good, and then walk out, because most people don't do that because they respect the grocery store.
Mhm.
Some people don't do that because they're afraid
Mhm.
of getting caught and blah, blah, blah. Nobody knows who they are. If we didn't have that system, they would still be scared because somebody owns the store and they would have something in place, and it's like, well, what's going to happen? There might be stores where it has happened a number of times, so people are aware what their weaknesses are. That store owner would probably be mitigating it somehow.
Mhm.
But I mean, with cops, and
Mhm.
you call the cops and all the threats, we don't do that kind of learning.
Yeah.
So
Sorry, it's exhausting. I don't mean to exhaust them. I'm just very inquisitive and I want to understand.
good. That's
Not
good.
trying to.
Well, it's helpful to find the things that stop people from expecting. What we need to do is to expect government to get things done without
Mhm.
threats.
Mhm.
And when they use threats, to point out, like, the cop's going to pull you over, license and registration, please. And
Mhm.
because it's always on my mind that you represent an implied threat to me, my conversation with the cop is partly based on, it kind of sucks that you're in the position you're in, because you
Mhm.
have to represent a threat to me to get me to comply with whatever, for what, police department revenue? I mean, it kind of makes sense. We want you guys out here because you supposedly make things safe. I'm not sure. Are there more accidents where there are cops or not? Because if there's a cop, people are like, oh no, there's a cop. They're a little bit more nervous.
Mhm.
They're paying attention to the cop.
Yeah.
I don't know. And the fact that there's no studies that say, if you look at the 3-block radius about where a cop is
Mm.
over the history of policing, what you find is 80% of the normal accident rate instead of 100%. So cops are great.
Mm.
There's no such study. And I think it's because a few people tried it and it's not 80%. It's like 150% or 110% or whatever. And it's like, well, yeah, that's because people get nervous. And okay, well then what do we do instead? We'll go to the beach and watch how people navigate.
Mhm.
There's no cops at the beach saying, oh no,
Yeah.
don't go out in that wave. We
Yeah.
figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, just as a personal example, I think we all experience this when we're on the freeway driving and you see a cop car,
Yeah.
all of a sudden everyone slows down
Yeah.
to 75, but everyone is going 85 when they were there,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, same kind of thing where it's that fear and nervousness. Even though half the time the cops don't, I mean, I guess it depends on the state, but the California culture in driving is
right.
a little different.
Most of the time it's pretty rare for me to pass a cop,
Mhm.
but I've done it
Mhm.
because I'm not speeding or the rest of the traffic is going faster than cop.
Right.
But it makes me a little nervous.
Yeah.
And I think it makes the cop a little, I don't know how a cop would feel when somebody's passing him. He looks at the traffic and he's like, I'm going through the flow of traffic. Everybody's going a little bit slower. He's not
Yeah.
actually speeding though.
Right. Yeah.
Man, the balls on that driver.
Exactly. Yeah, the human mind is fascinating. I think that too. It's like I'm like, oh, I don't want to pass him. See those red lights, that fear, the threat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so one more thing. I think, I could talk for a long time, but so you mentioned kind of more of like if we had a more of like a self-governance voluntary kind of thing. So one community that's been responsible for a lot of these things historically is the religious communities. where, you know, if they were homeless or, you know, other kinds of things, and now the government is saying this is our job. People will organize through their own conscious
Mhm.
values, and, you know, they'll see the pothole or see a problem in society if someone doesn't have food or whatever, and they'll pull their funds and
Mhm.
get things done and do great things. And so that's also, I guess, another example of inaction, how that kind of mentality
Mhm.
can work. But what's kind of, I don't know the stats on this, but to me, I feel like anyway, since I've been a kid in the, you know, 39 years I've been around, I feel like that has dramatically reduced. And the state has been
Replacing
saying,
it.
no, that's not your job.
Yep.
This is our job, and we know
Yeah.
how to do it better and whatnot.
I'm glad you noticed that. I'm pretty sure it is through the state replacing that the tendency of people to work together to solve problems is diminished. It is because the state replaces it. It's not because we're naturally becoming less helpful. It's because there's a force above us telling us to become less helpful.
Mhm.
Why I'm an anarchist.
Yeah. So why do you think that is? Why has that shift occurred? Is it the
Oh,
state just growing and trying to suck up more?
well, have you ever had power over somebody?
Well, I mean, I've had people working under me, I guess.
A little bit.
Yeah, or
Do you like it?
it's not because of I can tell them what to do. Yeah, I'm actually a little more leery because now if I'm kind of responsible for them,
Yeah.
it's kind of my
Yeah.
view. But I like to see when they've gotten better at something, or
Yeah.
they've turned over a project, or
Yeah.
it's like that feels nice.
Yeah. So you're a bad example. But you're,
I know people like that.
yes.
Yeah.
And you're mature enough to see and bear the weight of the responsibility of having that power. But you know the aphorism, power corrupts.
And absolute power
Yeah.
corrupts absolutely. Yeah.
And the more you think about that, it's actually partially our fault. And let me explain that. If somebody tells me what to do, and I accept their power over me to tell me what to do, then I give them the ability to get me to do things which my better judgment might say, don't do it,
Mhm.
because I'm not bothering to apply my better judgment. I'm
Mhm.
relying on theirs.
Yeah.
Which is, you could say that's a kindness. Sometimes we rely on our friend's better judgment. It's always foolish though, because you have the judgment. Just use it. You might use it and say, well, I'm not sure that's a good idea here. You might use it and say, oh yeah, I'll just go right along with it and not say anything at all. But always using it is a good idea. And that is what power destroys, because it says, yeah, if you use it and you disagree, then you get hurt.
Mhm.
And so power corrupts.
Yeah.
And when we say, yeah, I get that you're going to hurt me, but it doesn't matter, my judgment is still more important, we become anarchists and disobedient and
Mhm.
all that stuff that they want people to feel like, oh, you can't do that. You're going to mess up society. No, it's the opposite. We mess up society by ceding the power.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the Milgram experiment, the
Yes.
psychological one? Because that's just like
Yes.
rang in my mind.
Yeah.
And what was fascinating about that one was there was actually no force of threat.
That's right.
It was just an appeal to authority.
It's just authority.
And that's it. There was no, if you don't do this, something is going to happen. And that's how, I guess, brainwashed people can be, that this is just how it is. And if there's a guy in a lab coat,
Mhm.
you listen to what he says,
Yeah.
and you don't question if he's having you shock someone to apparently to death.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, there's a lot of this to say about the human psyche. And you bring up a lot of difficult points.
Well, here's another one then, because I'm not sure the human psyche places the what is it called? The abdication. I'm not sure that the human psyche places the abdication of responsibility as a positive thing. Like the human psyche isn't It doesn't do that generally. But that's what we're doing. Why? Because when you go to school, you're 5 years old when you start to go to school, and the teacher tells you what to do. Some of the kids say, but why? And the teacher says, don't ask,
Yeah.
just do it. And we learn, don't ask, just do it. It's authority. Real authority is something that you should ask. Real authority knows the answers, and so you ask. That's why the little kid asks. But the teacher gets frustrated because her job is not, her job description was watch these kids and answer all their questions, which it should be, in my opinion. Her job is make sure they learn this stuff. How's she going to do that? Well,
Yeah.
she's got to make them pay attention and blah, blah, blah. It's like the seed of abdicating responsibility is there in kindergarten.
I think maybe it should be for that young age. And I think Josh and I even talked about that. It's like when you're a young child, you have limited understanding and you do need some guidance.
That's why you ask.
Yeah, I don't object to explaining things.
Yes,
but I also
good.
understand when, you know, you're a parent and you're working 60 hours a week, you got to pay your bills, and you come home after a long day and just it was horrible. And then the kid is just pushing your buttons and you're just like, leave me alone. That's not ideal, but it's, I guess I sympathize. And sometimes it's more efficient for the person in authority just to say, shut up and do what I say.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that it's okay, but it's just to bring up a point that these are not just, it sounds really nice, but in practice,
it's understandable.
Right.
It's understandable. And my observation on what is understandable is that we do all kinds of things we shouldn't do because we don't know any better. When you know better, even then you might still do it because we all have the judge watching what we do, and we know it's in our head and we can ignore it. And if it's too inconvenient to actually honor the judge's judgment, we're just going to ignore it. And then we're going to feel a little like, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Well, if it's something all of society has been brainwashed to say, yeah, you should do that thing, and your judge says, I'm not sure that's right. And you're like, oh, well, everybody says it. And the judge is like, well, yeah, I can rely on the rest of society to back me up for ignoring you violating your own conscience. That's okay. And so then we just do it, and like we barely notice. And so my job is to encourage people, notice it and call it out and talk about it. Because when you start talking about it, people are gonna be like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And the kindergarten teacher is gonna say, wow, I should be spending way more time answering the kids' questions. And that would be such a beautiful thing. And it would probably in kindergarten, it wouldn't have the effect that it would have in like 9th grade. Because when the 9th grade teacher comes in to the teachers meeting and says, I open my classes asking the kids to have questions, I always have them ask questions, and it usually takes up the whole class, and we end up not getting through the material. That's why we're always behind. It's also why all of the kids in my class are above average on the standardized tests, because they ask the right questions, and I know how to guide them in that direction. But you're right, we're not doing the work. What do you want me to do about it?
Yeah. Well, I think what I really like what you said earlier, just recently, was you can just talk to your teacher, your neighbor or something, kind of promote these things. And maybe it's like a grassroots organic level. You don't have to go down to City Hall with a bunch of pitchforks and bang down and do all this crazy stuff. And, you know, that stuff can be infectious. And just talking like right now, it's great, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, Dave, was really fascinating to chat with you and get to know you. I hope you enjoyed the conversation.
Absolutely.
But that does feel like a great ending point for our conversation.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.